All right. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Can you say your name and give yourself a short introduction?
Sure. My name is Josel. I do Sidedraft Specialties on Instagram. Mainly, it's rebuild and tuning Sidedraft carburetors for older cars.
So I've vicariously known about you
Yeah.
for a while now. I don't know. I found out about you from Instagram, but I don't know how exactly I found out about you. I just remember seeing this guy with either always working on S30s, so
Yeah.
Datsun 240Z,
Yeah.
and then I was like all this side draft work, and we talked about earlier before the podcast.
Yeah.
It's a cool parallel, or it's an amazing parallel for us, where both of us are in this space doing both so many things, right? It's a lost art form that's literally dying right now.
Yeah.
It's a dark art because people don't understand it. There's so many misconceptions. All of that. So I just want to say to have you here and to meet you is great. Wow, cool. I finally get to meet this guy.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I feel the same way with you because I don't even remember how I ran into your page. I think I honestly was just looking at A86 hashtags and I saw your red Corolla and I just started following you from day one. Or I don't know when exactly it was, but it must have been a couple of years now too. And it was just oh, that's a cool red Corolla. And then the more I saw it, the more I'm like, man, this is so sick. And then I found out you were local, which made everything was oh wow, there's this guy who's super local to me. And, when you sent me the email, it was I didn't expect this to happen at all.
Yeah, likewise. I found out you were close by in the East Bay, and I was like, I gotta meet this guy one day. But how am I gonna premise it? What's the opportunity gonna be?
Right.
So yeah, I'm glad we got this opportunity.
And I mean, honestly, for the most part, if you're local and you just drop me a line, I would have been oh yeah, let's link up. But I mean, now it's my schedule's super busy. I work Monday through Friday now, and I only do side draft or do anything on my free time, on the weekends. So I mean, it worked out. And I mean, you and I have been in contact for not too long either, 2 weeks maybe.
Yeah, not that long.
Yeah.
So talk about that. So Sidedraft Specialties, and then you also have a day job too.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your day job first. What do you work for your day job?
Right. So I'm an admin for Retrosport.
Okay.
They're a Porsche race shop, or Porsche specialty race shop that's located in Berkeley. And so I was brought on to do a lot of administrative work, a lot of operations logistics, mainly to offload some work off my boss as well as my office manager. So a lot of my responsibilities is answering emails, making sure everything on the back end is running smoothly, but also kind of handle everything around transmission gears, because that's a very big portion of our sales. But also maintaining and, doing a lot of the maintenance on Porsche race cars, like the 962s, 934s, 935s, and RSRs.
How'd you get this job? How'd you find out about this?
This
seems to be a dream job for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, no, honestly, it was mainly I don't know how to put it, but so a friend of mine got me this job, and how he got the job was through a mutual friend of him and another friend. So he ended up going there first, and ultimately he wanted to move, or he wanted to get a different job.
Okay.
And so that's sort of where he picked me up, in a sense that, he would tell me all these things about working there. Oh yeah, just hanging out, just in the office, and it's him sitting in a race car, because they were they were moving stuff around. So I'm like, what on earth is going on, right? And then one day he said hey, I'm gonna be leaving within the next couple weeks. What are you interested in doing what I was doing. I'm like, yeah, duh, of course. And I didn't know exactly what he did, but I just knew it was like general office work. And I mean, that was more a reason for me to like go because it's something in line of what I wanted to do, like still hang around cars. Like ideally, I still want to be in cars like 20, 30 years until the day I die.
Yeah, likewise.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of set on that career path, whatever it may be, as long as it's in cars, that's where I want to be. On top of that, it kind of makes better use of like my degree, aka graduating with a German degree.
You graduated with a degree in German?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like
Okay.
modern languages, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I could speak German, I could read German. So it's in line with everything up until now. Like super into cars, I can speak the language, I can read, I can read things, and it's in Porsche.
How did you decide to get a degree in German?
So,
Was this your plan? Like
no, so a lot of
because that really works out too. Like I totally
no.
Like if you wanted to like be into French cars, you should probably learn French, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or like if I were to do it all over again, obviously like I own a Japanese car. I want to be with like Nissan. But I didn't think that far ahead into my future or like anything at all. It was mainly just because like I took German in high school and it was the only thing that was relatively consistent throughout my, like years of education. So it was like 4 years in high school on top of like 2-3 years in a community college, also like taking German classes. And initially I wanted to go somewhere in like mechanical engineering. And then I realized that like I slacked too much in like math and sciences that like I physically couldn't do it. I was just like too dumb. But, with German, at least it was like very consistent. And when it came time to like transfer, I was like, okay, well, what can I transfer into? And then the original plan was transfer with a degree, or like transfer with the intentions of finishing German, but then swap majors into something else if I were to choose, whichever. But ended up being like, you know what? I can always figure out what I can work as. I mean, I'm sure I can figure something out. And, it took a very long time and like figuring out what I wanted to do. But ultimately, I got to doing this.
That's so cool. That's so cool that like, I don't know. To me, it feels like instead of looking for a target career or target job, you just went with like your gut feeling, and you would think like, somehow like this will branch off and I'll like find my way.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the jobs now these days, I mean, unless it's like very specialized, like for example, if you want to be very technical, obviously if you want to be in like parts development, you need some sort of like engineering, like mechanical degree, right? But with something that's more on like the business end or of that like what's it called, of that nature, there's a lot of leeway with what you can do. So I didn't even know it was possible until I was talking with my brother. I'm like, I have an older brother, and he was telling me, he's like, yeah, one of our C-level positions at our company start off with a political science degree. Or like another person had like he graduated with an English degree, and now they're at like one of the higher levels, like a chief level position at like a big company.
Wow.
Yeah. So obviously, the big takeaway is like, as long as you kind of know where you want to be, then it's just a matter of like how to go from like point A, where you are now, and like point B to where like your ideal future is going to be. It's just a matter of like figuring out how to get there. And so how this ties into my whole spiel of working at this race shop, I mean, hopefully it opens up a lot of opportunities for me down the line, but at the same time, it does make use of like, like what I've learned by myself in terms of like cars, but also like making use of my degree, because like there are service manuals that are in German. We have vendors and we have like people that I email with are from Germany. So if there's something that's a little bit, hazy in terms, if anything, then at least I can understand what they're trying to say,
That's a very good point, because there seems to be like a general thought process that things will get easier with like Google Translate on your phone.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's not always reliable.
Yeah.
There's nothing like really understanding the language and like the context of
right.
Yeah.
Especially once you get into, say, like figure of speech or like like, for example, one of the biggest things I can think of, like in English, if you just bring your thumbs up, it generally means okay, right? That's like a whole nother colloquial meaning. But then in German, if you translate things literally instead of like what their colloquial meaning is, then that's where you can be like, where you can get lost in translation. Like, for example, like if you translate this phrase like directly, it means I bring my thumbs up to you. Like it legitimately is that, but then it just means good luck. Right. But I mean, even then it's like you can even say good luck literally and it would still mean the same. But once you get like into different meanings, then it's like, Google Translate will not help you whatsoever at all.
So back to carburetors. So even before Sidedraft Specialties, how did you even get your start into this?
Yeah, so I mean, so I didn't even get into it until I bought my first C.
Which was like how many years ago?
Ah, man, it was probably 6 years ago.
Wow, okay.
It's been 6 years ago, right. So I bought that car. It would have been exactly 6 years ago, 3 days ago.
Wow, cool, man.
Yeah, I think. So that was back in January 31st, 2014. So I've had that car for a long time. But how I got into carburetors was because I was having like issues where it would always foul plugs.
So you bought a Z with triple side drafts already on it?
No, it had the factory SU carburetors, yeah. So, and that was my start. And so I started reading up on it and I was looking through service manuals that had the Hitachi SUs. And I started looking at
Hitachi, like the TV company.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. Sorry for interrupting you, but go ahead.
No. I thought the same way. I was like, wait, what? But I mean, they did a lot of like Jaguar stuff, as far as I remember. I think in like the 60s Jaguars, they use like Hitachi SU or Hitachi style. Like they're very modeled the same.
Yeah.
So I was having. It was running great, but it kept fouling plugs. And so being at the time like a super broke college student, like I barely was able to afford the car. I dropped my entire savings on that thing. And I was like, well, I don't have any more money to kind of pay someone else to like look it over and tell me what's wrong. I'll just figure it out.
Yeah.
So it was mainly just figuring out how the carb was. Like I took them off. I changed all the gaskets. I cleaned everything up, put them back together. And it was still, like doing all these issues. But then that's sort of how everything started. Was my first set of carburetors, which was the factory SUs that came on the car. And then even before I bought the car, I knew I wanted set of triples.
Of course, yeah.
Because from like the sound of it, from hearing it like anywhere, like even in video games you could hear it, like because it would be like the 432, which has triple side drafts, and then from there it was like, oh, I want to replicate that sound. And so I knew from the get-go I wanted to have like either it'd be Mikuni's. I didn't even know what side drafts were at the time. I just knew they were like, oh yeah, there's like triple carbs. I didn't know what the brand were. I didn't know what the specifics of anything was. I just wanted that sound.
Yeah.
And then shortly afterwards, after I bought my car, I think it was like a couple months later, that's when I first bought my first set of triples. And then I had its own sets of issues like I couldn't figure out. And then that's what started like the whole cascade of like almost a new carb every year until like now, which is I'm on my 8th set.
Wow.
Yeah.
8 set of triples.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that process like?
Mhm.
Basically, no, not basically, like learning from scratch Sidedraft
Yeah.
carburetors. What was that process like?
So a lot of reading, like a ton of reading.
Like paper books, internet, like
Anything.
anything.
So obviously, if I try to go to library, chances are I'm not gonna find anything that I needed, or at least at the time I was still very inexperienced in a sense that I don't really know what to look for. I mean, now it's like if I want to find specifics of like say the Venturi effect, then I can look into like fluid dynamics and like physics. But aside from that, I didn't know where to start. So like any other person would, they'd start off with like forum posts, right? And then like Facebook groups, people always ask about things. And so you start piecing together data or start piecing together information. And then from there, it's also supplementing everything that you read so far with, say, factory service manuals for like the Mikunis. And so, yeah, it's honestly like a ton of reading. Like it was up to a point where halfway into university, I would much rather read more about carburetor stuff than study for my German final. It was to that point where there's like so much more information I've been finding in a short period of time where I just started compiling stuff for myself.
And then I know where you're going with. I know where this similar feeling. And then when you find like a little tidbit or secret, it's like, oh my God, I want to dig deeper.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. Is like, so here's one of the secrets of like how I know so much, right? Is if you combine the different service manuals from different carburetor manufacturers, you can technically piece together one master manual, because you'll have one specific thing that is written out in one manual, and then you'll have another piece of information written out in a different manual, and you'll have another piece of information written out in a different manual. So like if you just read one, you won't fully understand what's going on. But then if you read all three of them within the same section, for example, say the pump nozzles or whatever, then you can see like, okay, this is what this manual says. This manual is a little bit more in depth. And then this manual is a little bit more dumbed down. So like you'll have like 3 different levels of the exact same thing. And then from there, it's like you'll have like a much better understanding of like what's going on.
In parallel, we talked about this outside, the AZ6 6-speed transmission. So
yeah,
I have the Toyota J160 manual and I have the Nissan S15 manual because of that exact reason. There's holes in the Toyota manual where you look in the Nissan one, it's like, oh, there's what's missing. Or like the special tools or disassembly process, you'll see like how they do it different. Same exact process, but like this one they use a special tool, this one they say use a hammer.
yeah And that's the same thing with like my Mikuni manual, for example. Like I have both an electronic copy and a hard copy, and this goes along with like years of doing this stuff. Like I probably have like hundreds and hundreds of PDF pages of like things I've collected up until now. But it's the exact same thing where even though certain mechanisms are different per carburetor, the main difference would be, say, like the what's called like the pump circuit.
Okay.
So on the Mikuni, there's a diaphragm at the bottom, and it's an external pump. On a DCOE, like say a Weber or a SKOER, it's all internal, and it's not a diaphragm anymore, but it's a plunger with a spring. So even though they're 2 different mechanisms, they're still the same. They still do the same job.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where you need to start piecing together different manuals with each other, because you'll have one that's very detailed in like what it does, and you have one that's only specific for that carburetor, but it still tells you information about like what it's supposed to do. There's actually this one manual that I didn't even get to until like maybe 2-3 years ago. That would have saved me like a ton of headache.
Where are you finding these manuals at?
Dude, anywhere.
So
so basically I would just Google keywords. Like for example, like I would just Google DCOE manual or DCOE FSM or something similar, or DCOE write-up. If you just type Weber, you're either going to get a carburetor or a grill.
Oh, that's right.
So that's not very helpful. Like if you just put in Weber manual, you'll probably get like a Grill Master Weber or something similar, right? Or what have you, like maybe some race car super driver.
Yeah.
Like, whatever. So you have to start looking into, or at least this is what I did, right? I just looked at very specific keywords, which in this case, if you write in DCOE, it's very synonymous with Weber.
Yes.
And so I would start with that and then kind of expand my search box. So, I mean, yeah, it takes a lot of time because like I mentioned earlier, one of the diagrams that I saw was after like 20 pages into Google, and it was in Japanese. And you otherwise wouldn't find it. And so, yeah, when I saw like the diagram, I like archived all 6 pages of his blog.
Oh, wow.
Because I knew I was going to refer to this diagram down the line, even though I don't understand it now. But, obviously I can just Google translate everything to like get a rough translation. And since I know enough about carburetors when I saw it, that I immediately understood what they're trying, like what each thing was.
So let's see. So between where Sidedraft Specialties is now and then getting your start into it by necessity to be able to work on your own car, what's the middle? What is the middle? You are a Mikuni dealer also.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to put it. What led you up to being a Mikuni dealer?
Right. So it probably wasn't until like 2 years, or not even 2 years. It must have been a year into owning my first set of Mikunis. I actually at the time when I met my distributor, I met him at a Cars and Coffee at Black Hawk Museum by absolute chance. And at the time I still had my Webers, but already I was looking at a set of Mikunis, but I was still waiting on the right time to pull the trigger on it. And I met my distributor now, who ended up being my mentor with all things Mikuni, complete by chance. So from then on, it was more of like picking his brain about certain things. And he would, much like how I am now with you, is like I'll have like a general question and then he'll answer it in as detailed as he possibly could. So what would happen is I would have a question. I would ask him like, hey, what does this do? And he goes, oh yeah, so it starts off with blah, 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 blah. Like literally what he could answer in like, a sentence, he would answer it like in a 20-minute conversation, like 30-minute conversation, right? And then from there, whatever he would say, I would go back to the service manual and then just read up more on it. So it's more of like, it supplements whatever is told to you. And I mean, that's what it is. I mean, if someone were to like just strictly read the manual and fully understand it, they have everything that they need to know. But sometimes it's a little bit easier for someone to explain it, because even the wording in the manuals are like really off.
Before this, I worked at the Subaru dealer, and they had this like term that I don't know how PC it is, but it's called Jinglish.
Oh, okay.
Where it's like you can tell the manual's written in English, but not by like a native English speaker.
Right.
So there's stuff that's like, there's the instructions for it, but I'm not sure what they're saying.
Yeah. For me, it's more of like the phrasing that they would use. I can't give you an exact example of it, but there are certain phrases where it just sounds so weird that no matter how many times you go through like dictionary.com to like figure out, synonyms of the word or like whatever, or like a thesaurus, it won't help you.
Yeah.
But then, once my distributor explained what it was, it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And so going back, it's like, oh, I know exactly what that is. So that's how I first got my contact with my distributor, is basically meeting him at a Cars and Coffee, and we just kept in touch. It's also super handy that he lives super local to me.
Oh, nice.
Like, I think from driveway to driveway, it was like 10 minutes, like 10, 15 minutes. So, yeah. And him and I just kept in contact throughout the years. Because since at that point, I just had Mikunis, I would just buy all my parts from him. Like all my jets, all my gaskets, all my rebuild kits, whatever that I needed, I would just buy directly from him. And it really is just as easy at the time, just send him a text message or I'd call him.
So as a Mikuni dealer
Mhm.
right now, what do you do as a Mikuni dealer right now?
So basically, I just fulfill people's needs in terms of like anything to do with the PHH Mikuni. So if they need rebuild kits.
So first of all, for
Mhm.
people like me, almost
Right,
no
right,
knowledge.
right,
What
right.
is a PHH?
So PHH is Mikuni's designation for their Sidedraft carburetors.
Okay.
So it's an entire series of carburetors, even dating back from like the 50s,
Yeah.
like super early 60s. Obviously, a PHH would be something like a DCOE, but they also have like motorcycle carbs, which has a different code name for, like, I think it's like an HSR or something similar.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right. So it's really just a series of carburetors. And then there's like a series 2, like PHH2, there's a PHH3, then the 4, and there's a 5. So there's like various iterations of, you know.
And we were talking about earlier, they don't make Mikuni carbs anymore.
No, well, they do for motorcycles, but not for cars.
Okay.
No.
When did they stop production of carburetors for Mikuni for automobiles?
Right. It must have been very early 2000s, if
Okay.
not late 90s. Because at the time, from what my distributor tells me, because he knows a lot of this stuff, and then every time I'm over at his house, it's like a new story, right? It really is. Like I would just go there for like literally pick up parts, and we just shoot the shit for like 2 hours.
That's the best too. That's the
And
best.
the next thing I know, it's like he has to eat dinner. I have to get going because I'm already running late to where I need to be, and I'm like, oh crap, like I gotta go.
Yeah.
And from what my understanding was, very late into the 90s, Mikuni's molds for like the carburetors were already like going very worn, to a point that even carbs being sold brand new already had like manufacturing cracks.
Oh,
like
man.
like not like fatal, like, you know, something that's like fatal, something that leads to like a severe failure, but on the top plate, I should have brought my other set of Mikunis because this is a perfect example. You could see like on the top plate there would be like fissures and there would be like visible cracks, but really it's like a solid piece of aluminum. So those were like considered like the late series, like type 4s, and those were at the end of the run. And as soon as those molds broke, they just never bothered remaking them. So it must have been sometime in the late 90s or very early 2000s where you could still buy them brand new.
So people with their classic Mikuni carburetors still need parts.
Mhm.
What if they need hard parts?
We would just have to source them through junk sets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
So that's why they're like, in terms of pricing, they're just astronomically high.
Yeah.
Like for a set of triples, I mean, even when I sold my set of triple 44s, this was even like 2015, I sold a complete set for just under $3,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So people who used to run Mikunis, what carb have they switched to?
They either still run Mikunis. If they're trying to go for a different size, then if they were to do them now, it would just be an OER 47 or a Weber 50, Weber 55, Weber 48. But at the time, even before 2010, I want to say, or 2012, you can buy like a 50 SK or something for brand new.
Wow. So we're going to go a little bit on a tangent.
Sure.
So let's go into a little bit of carburetor company history. So what are some Sidedraft companies you can name?
I mean, we've talked about Mikuni. We've briefly talked about Weber, and then there's SK/OER,
Um,
or
and
rather,
then,
Mikuni Solex. Those were under the
yeah.
same umbrella.
Okay, and then older, there's one that starts with a D.
Delortos.
What
yeah.
what are those?
So
I'm asking because I used to have a set. I bought those because I was
Right.
dumb.
right, yeah. You and like many of my friends that like even up to a point, I thought about getting Delortos, but
What are those?
as far as I can remember, or I mean, my memory is gonna be like so off because I just don't even look them up anymore.
Okay.
But they're like this very. I want to say they're more popular with the European / French / very European automobiles, or even to a point Italian. But there are another set of series of Sidedraft carburetors that people would otherwise put in their cars.
How come they're not popular?
Mainly it's because it's not as like, for example, like me personally, if I were to get a Delorto rebuild kit, I'd have to go to eBay.
Oh,
And it doesn't seem like it's a legit seller. It's more of like one of those like, oh yeah, we just remade gaskets for this carb. But it's not like an authorized Delorto rebuild kit.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it has like very unique parts, and a whole bunch of like small things. And to me, it's like just parts for it doesn't seem all that readily available compared to like a Mikuni OER or a Weber.
What's up with Mikuni Solex? Because you just reminded me.
Right.
Because Solex is also the locks too.
Yeah. As I recently found out, like maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. This is where I'm not entirely sure, but at some point in the 50s or some point in the 50s / 60s, it would be Solex carburetors. And if my memory serves me correctly, or if I remember this right, sometime in this, I want to say mid or late 60s was when Mikuni came in to offer it to the Japanese market.
Mikuni is not a Japanese brand?
No, so Solex.
Oh, okay.
Like Solex carburetors. Because Solex would predate a lot of what Mikuni is now. So that's what would be common as, say, like Mercedes from like the 60s. They would have a Solex PHH carburetor. And so at some point they had like, maybe it was a merger, maybe it was like a company buyout, or maybe it was some sort of partnership where they would come in as a bigger company to sort of support it a little bit more and offer it to like the Japanese market. At least that's if I could make like a guess. And I read into this like very briefly, but I mean this was like years ago. But I mean, yeah, you could still see like they still use like the Solex stuff up until like at the end of its run.
And then SK and OER, because SK,
yeah,
I know they make bike carbs.
Yeah.
And I know that because Corolla guys put SK carbs on there.
Yeah.
So what's up with SK and OER?
So OER, if you go on their website, they actually have like a history of like how they came to be. And for like a TLDR, I mean, I'm also missing a lot of the specifics of it all.
That's okay.
But SK started out as SK. And so they offered carburetors in the late 70s, early 80s. And they're also the ones that offered like blow-through surge tank boxes along with like HKS. And
OER or SK offered that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like SK had their own like SK Comp surge box.
Okay.
Yeah. So HKS was one of the big ones. And then you also had SK, and there's like another company that's like slipping my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they would be the ones that would like offer these surge tank boxes for like if you wanted to turbocharge your Z car.
Yeah.
Or like I think they did offer it for the Toyota guys as well, I think. For certain engines, I want to say.
I know for sure HKS has a few blow-through kits for classic Japanese, not for like Toyota applications.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, and then I think sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, OER ended up acquiring SK.
Okay.
So the design itself is still nothing's changed. Like all the parts on it is still roughly the same. It's all modeled very the same. There are small differences, like the original SK top covers had starter circuits for cold starting it during the wintertime, where you need to dump fuel so that way it turns over.
So external starter circuit.
Right.
So what are these modern OER cars do for cold start now?
Yeah, so the OERs, you can't cold start them. So the cold start mechanism is actually disabled. You'd have to drill through the carburetor to open them up.
Okay.
So normally there would be like, say, there would be like a lever mechanism here.
Yeah.
And then if you look right there, it's blocked off.
Okay.
So what that is when you flip it open, there's a tube that goes all the way down. And then from there, whatever vacuum is from the throttle plate will suck all the fuel out. So it enriches at cold start.
So we should have premised why you're here. One of the reasons we have you here is because, spoiler alert, putting side drafts on the wagon.
Yeah, right.
So when I get side drafts on there, how do I cold start the car? Is there like a choke or anything? Or
no? So on a properly tuned carburetors, unless you live in the snow, you don't need a starter circuit.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Unless you live in the snow where you get like 0 degrees or like anything colder than like 32.
Okay.
Right. Because pretty much it's only really there because, you just need a lot of like fuel enrichment at like cold starts. But since we live in California where it doesn't snow, but it does rain.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really, it doesn't really go under freezing unless you live in like in the mountains. All you need to do is like literally is just pump the pedal like a couple times.
Yeah.
And then just start it over.
Nice.
And then you have to baby it a little bit, like rev it up high, like not really high, but like 1500, just idle for a second there. And then you can just hop out of the car, let it idle, warm up. But yeah.
Back to Mikuni. So what motorcycles are people buying brand new Mikuni carbs for right now?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Oh, that's okay.
I have no idea, but I can only guess. If I can guess, it's probably like a 2-stroke. I have no idea.
That's okay. Yeah, I don't know a lot about motorcycles either,
Yeah,
so that's
I have
fine.
no idea, but I just know they offer it for like the 4 cylinders. I think whatever you could get like the Kahins for, I'm pretty sure they offer it for Mikuni as well. Because I think that's their other direct competitor would be like Kahins or
Yeah. Mikuni. Yeah, Kahin, they make the FCR carbs, right?
FCR,
the window ones.
Yeah. And a little known fact, I actually found this out very recently. Even Kahins have their own variations of like their carburetors. Like they have like the CR1 or whatever it is, and they have like the very early C designation like carbs I didn't even know about. But yeah, I only knew about that because there was a car recently that I worked on that uses Kahins.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you've worked on a few SEMA cars.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Sure. So so for the first car, it's a Datsun 510. It's the owner, his name is Daniel. And it's this gray 510 that was in SEMA like a couple of years ago. But I wasn't directly involved with that build until after SEMA, where he needed to drive his car out to JCCS, which was like just later that year. And so I ended up getting a message from his name is Sergio. I ended up getting a message from Sergio. And he goes, "Hey, I'm going down to JCCS. Are you able to make time to tune my 510?" And he has this right-hand drive Bluebird, which would be like the true coupe for the 510.
Yes.
And it's not like a two-door sedan, but it's like a coupe. So it has like a slanting. It looks more of a coupe than more of like a two-door sedan. So he messages me. And he goes, "Hey, can you take a look at my car? Like, I wanted to make sure I make it down to JCCS." I'm like, "Oh yeah, no, that's no problem. Like, I'm free on this day. Let me know when you're free. And he goes, okay, yeah, cool. So Daniel's going to be here as well. So can you check out his 510 as well? I'm like, sure. I mean, they're both going to be in the same spot. So it's like perfect for me. Like I get to, mess with two cars in one sitting. So I just go there the entire day and don't have to like keep going back and forth or like change locations.
Yes.
And so up to that point, I knew about the car. I knew about who he was because, when they were advertising this car, they were like, oh, this is Daniel Wu from Into the Badlands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so every single post about his car was in regards to that. Like, yeah, like I never really watched it. I just knew about the car because people were blowing it up. So when I met him, this was me not seeing any of his like work. And, we were just like chatting like regular people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, obviously celebrities are like regular people, but it felt like I was just talking to one of my buddies. Or like how you and I are talking. It's like very, just whatever.
Yeah.
And so, so that was the first car that was his first SEMA car that I had my hands on because he needed some carburetor work, but it's mostly jetting and sinking issues, which we pretty much knocked out that night.
Awesome.
Yeah. But then I ended up going back to swap certain things, but so far that car is still, it still drives around and he's like having so much fun.
Do you know he had another SEMA car this past year?
Yeah, his S800.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking like this guy must have like a penchant for like old schools and classics.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the other car that I had my hands on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't see what engine that thing had in it. Does that thing have side drafts on it too?
Yeah, so it has the Caheens, and that's what I believe what would otherwise come stock for that car, for that motor.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and it like revs like 9, 10, 11 grand.
Wow. Well, what's it called? It probably is a motorcycle engine in there.
Yeah. I think the entire mechanism is just like a motorcycle. Yeah, it's a motorcycle engine that's put in
an automobile.
Yeah, I mean the car itself is like stupid light.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't like I don't remember how much it weighs, but I just remember it weighing like nothing.
Yeah.
And during that time, they just wanted like very small sports cars from like the late 60s. So it has a lot of that European sports car styling cues.
You can totally see it. Yeah.
And so with that one, so after I tuned Daniel's 510, him and I still kept in contact. Like I would just ask him how he's doing, how his car is running and stuff like that. Basically just checking in what's been going on with his car. And then he tells me, and he's very local too. So I visit him ever so often. So with his S800, he was telling me like, everything, like when I visit his shop, the cars and like in pieces, there would be like just the chassis itself or like parts and boxes, what have you. And we were just like, grab lunch. And there was one time when he messages me, say, hey, this is like super short notice, but are you free right now? I'm like, what's going on? He's like, we're having a ton of like carb issues. Do you mind like checking it out? I'm like, yeah, sure, but I'm not free until like 4. Is that cool with you? He's like, oh yeah, no, like I'll see you then. So that's when we troubleshoot a lot of issues because it was just flooding. So we checked to see if it was like a gasket issue, something's like sticking or what have you, and we were just like trying to figure out. And even then, that took like maybe 2 or 3 separate days. And and then after it was all said and done, it was just like I check with him and I asked how is S800, and he goes like, dude, it screams. Like it's so sick. Yeah.
So current day Sidedraft Specialties, what services do you offer?
So I do both. So primarily rebuild. Well, primarily is I do a lot of tuning. So if someone's having issues with like a leaky carb, or it's not running the way as it should, or it used to run better, now it's running worse, like those type of things. is where I kind of where I step in and offer. It's like, if you as long as you're local in the Bay Area, I just drive out to you. I just check out what's going on, and then if I have all this stuff with me, let's just knock it out.
Wow.
Yeah, and aside from that, I also rebuild Mikuni's and I rebuild Weber stuff. With the Mikuni stuff, obviously I can rebuild it in house, and then I can just build a customer later. But with the Weber stuff, or even to an extent OER, they would have to supply all the gaskets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's this like a misconception or old wives' tale about how carburetors are finicky. So like in the summer and in the winter, I'd have to call you back and retune it for summer and winter.
Yeah. So to an extent, that's true. I mean, if we tune it on like a very humid day, for example, or like a very cold day, obviously if we tune it to 100% on any of those days, as soon as it gets way hotter, or the humidity goes way up, or it's like really dry, it's gonna run a little bit different. But that also takes into account a lot of other factors. But even then, that's not entirely true, because in most times, when I go over to tune a car, I'm there during the day. Typically, it's at the hottest time during the day. So I tune it for however it is on that day. And even then, in my notebook, I know like what day of the month it is. Like I write the date, what the weather is like, and I look like what the humidity is like as well, and like the time of day, just to have a frame of reference, right? So when I go to some place to, check up on a car, or, one of my clients calls me to tune their cars, I would take note of those things, and I, change the jets, sync them up, and I do everything that I need to do. And I always tell them is like, drive it around for like 2 weeks straight. Like during the day, during the night, tell me what it does. Because that basically tells me what changes I need to make.
Okay.
Yeah. Because otherwise, if I just tune it at night, the moment it's like daylight, it's like a little bit different. So it's sort of, if you can think of it this way, there's like 2 degrees of ends. One's at like its coldest, and one's at its hottest. So if you try to tune it for its hottest, it's at the very edge, where as soon as you have any change of temperature, it's gonna immediately not run right. Like it's gonna run very lean. And on the opposite end, if you tune it at the very coldest, where you have a lot of dense air, especially if it's wintertime when it's like really, really cold, the entire jet ranges are a lot richer. So by the time it goes up to temperature, it's gonna be like a very rich carb. So the way I kind of set things up is like, just drive around for 2 weeks, drive it during the day, drive during the night, tell me what it does. And then based off of their input, because I like to be as very detailed on these things. So I just tell them like, anything that you can tell me, just tell me. Like it could be as little as like, it feels kind of flat from like 2,500 RPMs to 3,000. It feels like flat. And then I'm like, okay, I can take a look at that as well. But generally you have this scale, and based on their input, you just play around with it. So throughout the year, I mean, this is for my set of carburetors as well. I think I've only had to change jets on after I get like a very good tune on it. I don't even touch it for years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What does altitude do for Sidedraft carburetors?
Yeah. So if you go up into the thousands, like if you're up in the mountains, there's a lot less dense air. So you have to compensate certain jet changes to accommodate, the less available air. Like, yeah. So I'm trying to remember exactly what it is, but yeah, you pretty much have to change how the fuel is mixed / atomized before it goes into the floats. Because you've probably heard this before, carburetors are just metered fuel leaks, right? Yeah. And so through the series of vacuums and through the series of like fluid dynamics and what have you. Fuel is drawn through certain orifices, and then everything is metered by these jets. And depending on the size of these jets, like the size of the orifice of the jets, determines how much fuel goes through them. So once you start getting into the higher altitudes, the more that gets finicky, because it's a balancing game between how much fuel enters the motor, but at the same time, how much air bleeds you incorporate to emulsify the fuel. So I think it's the higher the altitude that is, the less of an effect it is. So you have to compensate for it.
Yeah. One thing that really piqued my interest recently, I think it was either a very recent First Friday Corolla meet where RJ was there with his N2 Starlet.
Oh yeah.
And then you're the one who did the carburetor install and tuning for him.
No, I just tuned the carbs, but I believe I'm not entirely sure, but by the time I was working on those, he already had carburetors on the 4U. Okay. Yeah.
But one thing that really piqued my interest was, like, I asked him, like, is there any like cold or hot weather quirks? And he told me he drove it from where he lives in the North Bay all the way down to JCCS in SoCal. And he was like, yeah, I drove it all the way. It didn't have problems. And I was like, this really piques my interest.
Yeah, I mean, once you set something, I mean, generally there's not a lot of changes, you know, unless obviously it's altitude or like crazy weather changes going from like 120 degrees to like below freezing, right? Unless it's something to that range, then it's probably a good idea to have like different sets of jets with you. But I mean, like I mentioned earlier, like being in California, there's really only like, I mean, it goes down to like 40s like past midnight, but then
it doesn't, like you were saying, it doesn't like snow.
Yeah, so you don't really need to like be worried about like cold starting or anything like that. And then generally, like, as long as you put it like a happy medium of like the various ends of things, you shouldn't have to worry about like jet changes too often, unless of course like there's a specific thing that you're trying to chase. Then it's like you can spend hours on it, like days, weeks, months. But I mean, the only best way to do it is you just have like a notebook, and then just record what's going on. I mean, I think for me it's like when I'm like really serious about like getting everything done, then it's like, for certain months out of the year, I'll have like one jet setting. And for every month and for every other month, I'll have like these things. But then obviously you don't have to go that crazy. But if you're trying to squeeze every single ounce of power that you have, then that's kind of the extent you have to go, without obviously diving to the world of like electronic fuel injection or like individual throttle bodies.
Yeah. Okay. So the question that made us stop talking outside and want to start podcasting, we both know one particular individual.
Oh yeah. My homie Jacob.
How did let's talk about this. You're meeting Jacob San himself.
Yeah, so the very first time I met Jacob, so to give a little bit of context, right? I think it was 2015. I started going to school at San Francisco State University, and so during that time, I was living in Daly City. Like I was living with my relatives out there. Like they had a spare room, and I tried commuting for the first couple weeks or first few months, and I realized that it's not fun. Work. Like nah, like I spent like 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours commuting, and I could be like 3 hours already doing my homework or sleeping or eating or whatever. So there was this one time, one of my friends hit me up and he goes, "Hey, like, you want to go to this meet in like San Bruno or something? Like it's by Tanfran, I want to say." Okay. So I'm like, sure. Like, I mean, I have my car with me. Like, yeah, let's meet up and let's hang out. So I was just about to leave. So I was there for like a couple hours. And I was just about to leave, and there was this blue Corolla that parks like right behind me, right? But since I'm already in my car, I'm like, oh, that's a pretty cool Corolla. Like like that's pretty cool. I don't know whose it is. I see the owner just hopped out, and then that was it. But I was already like warming up my car. I was already like, I had my hoodie on, like I had my jacket on. I was already like buckled in, and then I could hear Jacob like freaking out. I was like, oh my god, is that an S30? Like, is that a 240Z? Oh man! And so I'm like, I was rolling down, and I was like chatting with him for a split second, and then from there I was like, hey man, I gotta go, but I'll see you around. And it wasn't until I want to say like maybe a month or two ago.
That was a very good Jacob impression, by the way. No, because it sounds exactly like it.
Yeah, man. So sometime afterwards, I think, so that was in the fall semester, I want to say. Come springtime, I fully lived in like in the peninsula, like Daly City. And so I would just drive to campus, park my car in the garage, and then drive home. And, being like an absolute madman I am, I'm like daily driving my Z. Every single day. Unless it's raining or I get stuck in the rain. Then it's like, okay, I have no choice but to drive it. So I would park my car in like the upper levels. And as soon as I find parking, just park my car there. So it could be the most exposed parking spot, aka as soon as you turn the corner, you see my car, or it's just like wherever it is. And so it was just like days and weeks and even months of doing that until finally I just got out of my German class, and it was in one of the humanities building at SF State. And I was walking towards the quad, and I was just walking in the pathway, and then I hear someone going, hey, is that a Nardi? Because during that time I had a quick release.
Yes.
And so I'm like, okay, well, obviously my locks suck so much in that car. Like I could, like if I took any house key, I can open my locks on the driver's side. So as an added safety thing, obviously I look back and I'm like, man, I'm one of those guys that like carry their steering wheels with them to class. And so I'm like, okay, well, at least it's actual theft deterrent. Because on top of that, I had a clutch lock. And then I have like a whole bunch of other stuff, like multiple kill switches. And on top of that, like I had a removable wheel without power steering. So if you can overcome all of those things, then by any means, congratulations.
You win.
Like I'm not even mad. I'm like impressed. Like, how did you even, right? So so it was a combination of a couple things. It was my class being, because all the humanities courses, aka all the foreign languages courses like Japanese, German, Spanish, Italian, and French, they're all in the same building, pretty much. And that day, I had my wheel attached to the back of my backpack, like strapped in, and I was also wearing a hoodie. That was, I believe it was in. Do you know which writing system that they like Japanese use in order to
English convert like an English word into Japanese?
Yeah. Is that a?
There's only two, katakana, hiragana. Yes. But I'm not sure which one it is.
Yeah. I'm sure Jacob will stoutly correct us.
Yeah, at some point we'll get it. We'll get a DM like, after this.
He'll be like, these nerds don't even know.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. He's like, bro, like you failed me. And anyway, so it's one of those two. And if you translated those words, it says Datsun. So I was wearing that hoodie. And so it was a combination of that hoodie with like my steering wheel, my backpack, and I hear someone running, trying to grab my attention. I was already putting like my earbuds in, listening to music, about to meet up with my friends. And that's how I met Jacob. And then he goes, hey, yeah, like I met you like at the meet in 10th Fran. I'm like, oh shit. He's like, yeah, I have a Corolla. I'm like, oh shit. And yeah, we've been friends since then. Like him and I would just hang out whenever. And we had, oddly enough, the same exact Nardi wheel.
Oh wow.
Nardi Classic in 350 mil.
Have you seen his current steering wheel?
Yeah, his RS Watanabe Falcon wheel.
Yeah.
It's so nuts. So insane. It's crazy. It's what a lot of like the super hardcore Datsun guys, they'll like lose their shit over that.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like I mean, I'm more than happy with minority. I mean, I'm not particularly picky on my wheels either. Like, I don't particularly go crazy on like these uber rare stuff. Because at the same time, as for me, it's like, yeah, it's great, but I mean, I'm more than happy with like my wheel that I have. If anything, I'm a lot more picky with my bucket seats because driving position is like my number one thing. Like, it took me years to figure out how high I need my seat to be, but also like what type of seat will let me achieve these things.
Yeah. Have you ever been fitted for a bucket seat before?
No, I wish.
Yeah. So
if I had like a ton of disposable income,
well,
totally do.
You know what? You can get fitted for a bucket seat to know what to look for in terms of body shape,
right?
Without like actually buying a seat.
Yeah.
So my current OMP in my Corolla, I got fitted for at the shop in Sonoma Raceway. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Sonoma Raceway. I forgot what your shop's called. But yeah, it was cool to It was cool to learn. Like they pretty much told me like to sit in all these. Like he looked me over. He's probably looking like how tall I am or whatever.
Right.
And he told me to sit in these different seats. And there's interesting stuff I learned. Like he told me like, oh, for your body size, you have a long torso, so that's why like the holes in the seat for the harnesses, like you physically fit in the seat, but because your torso is long, the harness holes are in the wrong spot. So I think even just going to a race shop and actually getting physically fitted for a seat, knowing what to look for.
Yeah. I think in terms of experience though, for me personally, I went through like a ton of seats, much like my carburetor whole debacle. I've went through like a whole bunch of seats as well. But I think the closest thing to where I need to be in terms of like seating position, how high I can be, even up until the thigh bolstering, I think the closest thing I can find is a Brid. Like any of the Brid 3 series. Like if I can get a Zig 3 because it's discontinued now. If I can find one of those, that's still going to be my number one. But yeah, because I ran a Cobra Imola S. And because it's a flat bottom, I sit a little too high. So in order for me to like get it to where I need to be in terms of like my eye level, I have to take the cushions out and sit on straight fiberglass.
Okay. Yeah.
So just to get it to where I need to be. And then same thing. And then I end up selling those, got myself like some used Brids that I only used for like a little bit. And then I end up picking up these race techs, the RT4009, I want to say. No, yeah, it was the 4009. And those were by far the most comfortable seats I ever sat in.
Does it bother you if people say bride?
Yes.
Does it really?
I mean, it shouldn't, but I mean, it's just one of those things that are like, yeah, call it kind of like Brid.
Because technically it should be pronounced Bride.
A Bride?
Yeah. Use de is the should be the last one. But I'm sure Jacob will correct me on that too.
Yeah, we're gonna get like a long conversation with Jacob later after this. But no, I don't know. I mean, I've heard some people say Brid, and I think if you say Brid, everybody knows what it is. Yeah. If you say brides, like, oh my god, brides, right? I don't know. It's just one of those like weird things that I'm like not super adamant about, but like,
well, your degree is in language, so yeah, probably you should be bothered by it.
Pretty much, like when someone say Porsche, I'm like, you mean Porsche?
That's the other thing. Like, I can't do Porsche, man. I feel like I don't know.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. Like, I didn't realize I would be such an elitist with these things because I like scoff at elitists. Oddly enough, but because I started learning the language, I'm like, okay, trying to be as authentic as possible. Like, I mean, that's a whole goal. You don't want to pass off, but you also wanted to like get rid of whatever accent that you would have when speaking a foreign language, or at least those are one of the goals that you want to achieve. So when it comes to like German words, I just try to pronounce them as authentic as possible. So whenever someone says like, for like Porsche. I'm like, Porsche? You mean Porsche? And they're like, yeah, I just said that. I'm like, no. Yeah. I mean, same thing with like for example, like the company Koenigsegg.
Oh, you probably don't say it like that. How are you supposed to pronounce it?
Yeah, Koenigsegg.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's that in the beginning, like, I don't think in English you can naturally make that Koenigsegg.
Yeah, Koenigsegg. Yeah. Well, so I mean, we'll go on like a small tangent here.
No,
but
no
when
problem.
when you see the O with the two dots over it,
Yeah.
that's like forming your mouth as an O, but also pronouncing E at the same time. So, for
wow.
example, like Koenig wheels. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it, not Koenig.
No, Koenig's my pronunciation.
Yeah. So those are one of my small gripes that I have. And I'm like, okay, I hate to be that guy, but listen, man. I don't want you butchering my words, okay?
So, okay, so back to carburetors.
Yeah.
So we're putting what's the plan for my 3TC Corolla? So I contacted you saying like, hey, I want to put side drafts on my car.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start. So
Yeah.
how do go from there? Like how are we gonna start?
Yeah, so I pretty much made you a small list already. And it kind of touched like pretty much everything from the carburetors to how you're going to route your fuel. So obviously we're going to start with OERs because generally it's a lot better to start with new. And if you have issues, then it's a lot easier to diagnose from a new set as opposed to used. Because once you start getting to used market, that's when, you have like misaligned shafts or everything's like out of tune, or like you have nicks where they're not supposed to be, like, all these things that, user error on previous owners that have already done and blame it on like a carb issue, right? So it's a lot better to eliminate all these variances already from the get-go. So that's why I suggested to get OERs, because one, you can easily buy them like now if you wanted to, and they get to your doorstep in like a week. Or yeah, that's pretty much it, really, just OERs. I mean, they're also like very, very easy to set up as like a first user basis type of thing, and we're not going to be dousing ourselves in fuel trying to adjust floats since everything is just accessible from the top. And then from there is the next, which would be your intake manifold. So we can try to find used manifolds. We might have to try really hard to find them, but when it comes to used stuff, it's the same issue. Like, things are worn, things may or may not be missing. So it's a lot better to start new. So
you told me I think in that email you said you don't recommend that one manifold.
I believe it's a Canon manifold.
Why? Why don't you recommend the Canon?
So with my experience with Canons, a lot of their stuff just doesn't want to align correctly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And on top of that, it's like, so one of my things is with the Harada stuff, or like Kamiari, whichever you prefer. I mean, some call them Kamiari, some call them Harada, but they're the exact same manifold. The way that the return spring is set up on the Harada is it's on the main shaft itself, where all your linkages is set up. With a Canon, it's externally, so you have to add your own spring. So you have to go to like Ace Hardware or Home Depot, trying to match like a spring that you can use, and then the tension's all different, and it's like, it's a headache.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I don't know why, but for every single Canon manifold I've ever had or ever seen or, ever touched, the posts aren't exactly true.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they're slightly off-centered, whatever it may be. And then on top of that, you have like a single like Heim joint eyelid. So if you just need to move something 1 millimeter or 0.5 millimeter, you can't, because you're already like, depending on the thread pitch itself determines how far that's going to be. So for it to be completely true, for example, like this, and then if you move that eyelid outwards, it's going to be 1/over. There's no way to get it to half, unless you have an extremely fine, like fine thread pitch where you can do that. But a lot of those manifolds have like their own specific stuff. So it gets difficult trying to find these things. But at least with the Harada stuff, they include everything. And even to a point like if you have to adjust the pitch, everything's like double inserted.
Before I even clicked on that link for that manifold, I already kind of knew like this is probably going to be the more expensive one. It's probably going to be a Japanese brand, but I've already gone through this before where it's like you buy the more expensive thing
and you don't have to worry about it ever again.
It's pretty, it fits.
Yeah.
All the parts are there. It probably comes with an instruction manual and some cool stickers.
Pretty much. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, you get like a bunch of like Japanese newspapers as packing, but
but it's not like I'm sure you know a lot of reproduction or parts for classic stuff. It's like you bring out your like Dremel already, like this is new.
Yeah. I mean, there is, if I have to make like one gripe, it probably is like the casting, like the casting on the inside of the runners isn't exactly the greatest. But I mean, I've spent like maybe 30 minutes with like just a sanding cone.
Just to smoothing it out. Yeah. Would you recommend I do that too when I get that thing?
Yeah. It's just one of those things that you might as well do it while you're there. Because it's only like 30 minutes or an hour.
How fine of a sanding cone would you go up to?
You don't have to go too crazy. You just want to make sure you get rid of a lot of the sanding marks or like the casting marks.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can even run like I think I remember using like an 80 grit just to get rid of a lot of stuff, and then I just go over like a 120 quickly, and then that's good. Yeah,
because I imagine it's similar to fuel injection where you actually don't want a mirror finish.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's so many schools of thought about that. I mean, you have
what's your school of thought on that for Sidedraft manifolds?
So I can't really form an exact basis on that because I've only read everything up to this point. So unless I do the experiment myself, I can't really say which I prefer, because I can see arguments for both sides, and it's just a matter of like, if I have all the resources to test it out, then I can form my own opinions on it. But for me personally, as long as it doesn't intrude on airspeed itself, then whatever it is, just go for it.
That's a really good way to I take the same principle when I give people advice, or like usually give people advice. Is like, what do you think about this? And I say, well, here's two schools of thought, and then like here's what I have experienced.
Yeah, and I'm the same way, because I mean that's the whole reason why I've gone through like 8 different set of carburetors too, right? It was because I always want to experiment on whatever it is. I mean, there's always like what people say, and then what is factually correct, however people want to put it as. But then there's also like understanding why that is versus like just taking whatever people say as like their 2 cents. And so and this is exactly why I do these things, is because like, okay, well, people say you can't run say 44s, 4750s on like a stock 2.4 liter with like slightly higher compression. And when you ask them why, they just generalize saying, oh, it's too big of a carb. It's like, what makes it too large of a carburetor? And so once you start getting into questioning certain things, the more they're not able to answer you because they themselves don't know why. And so it didn't really take long for me to understand why something is. But I mean, it all boils down to like airspeed. Because you want to maximize that airspeed without sacrificing the amount of CFM you can take. So there's actually this video where you might have seen this. It's Speed Academy did for the super crazy 350Z with a VQ.
Okay.
So they were testing out different different size individual throttle bodies. And the difference is literally like 2 millimeters. So I think they were comparing something like a 41 millimeter to a 43. And they said the exact same thing. It's like they're already sacrificing airspeed because they're not making any more power, but they are starting to lose certain things.
Oh, okay.
And that's due to insufficient airspeed. So when it comes to carburetors, it's very similar. Like you want to maximize as much airspeed as you want, but also maximize as much available CFM. So it's turns into this balancing game where if you get a ton of airspeed, but then you're not getting a lot of, CFM through them, then you're sacrificing a lot that would be otherwise on the table. And then same thing, say if you maximize CFM, but you're not getting enough airspeed, you're actually not making full use of your equipment. So yeah, it's just like this balancing game. At least with carburetors, like you can go as big as you want generally, but then you can play around with like certain things and it'll mimic as if it was running a smaller carb. But when it comes down to like fine tuning things, everything is exacerbated because when you have a ton of airspeed, a lot of these issues don't come up. But when it's like a little bit on like the very edge where it's less than ideal, you're basically going through every single thing and trying to optimize each thing as you go. But yeah, so that's sort of my take on that as well. It's sort of like I want to understand why are certain things the way they are. It's like, why are, say, for example, 45s too big of a carburetor compared to a 40? Why can't I seemingly run 50s on a stock 2.4? And so it's just experimenting on my own personal projects, but it's also like a learning thing for me. Because otherwise, if I just follow what people say, then it's like I'm not learning for myself. So
the other thing in my mind too is like you're not pushing development, right?
Yeah, because it is out of my certain set of skills. I mean, like I can play around with parts, but I mean, for me to figure out like actually custom like drilling certain things for each carburetor, like as they are, I need to have like machining skills. I need to be able to make like these very niche parts. Like if I were to make like a small jig that screws into like a thing, I need to know how to make that. And if I don't have that skill set, I just physically can't do it. Right. So, I mean, as much as I would like to do these things, because I already have like a sheet of how to optimize certain things. It's just I don't have the skill set to go through with them.
Yeah. I really admire you try to push these boundaries, like putting 50s on your S30.
Oh, people hate me for that.
Dude,
it's so great.
Because like pushing development of technology, the chassis, pushing development is like so important, right? Because you may be at this stopping point where like you don't have this certain skill set, but it inspires someone else to be like, oh, that is possible, and like I have this skill set.
Yeah.
And then someone else can like either gain inspiration or like pick up the torch from you.
Right. And here's like one of the crazy things after diving into the world of side drafts. There's actually a guy that develops custom parts for the Weber, and it fixes a lot of these issues that a stock 45 otherwise has. And we've discussed this before with the progression holes and the number of progression ports there are dictates the characteristics of how the carb will run on partial throttle. So the number of holes, as well as the orientation of these holes, determines how it'll run in those conditions. So with the Mikuni, it's 4 holes and they're arranged in a diamond. And so by far, in terms of like out of the factory, out of the box, those drive relatively well. With an OER, it's just 3 and it's in a straight line. So there's no way for it to be like progressive. It's more of like, here's 1 and then here's 2 and then here's 3. But since there's only 3, it has like this weird lean spot where it shouldn't, like, it feels like it's underjetted, but then once you get beyond that, it drives fine. And it's literally just an off idle thing. And then same with the Weber, it's like it has like 1 hole right at the very front, like where it meets with the throttle plate, and then the rest are like way further back. So with the guy who's developing a lot of these parts, this is where I got the idea from. He actually makes a insert and he provides a drill bit, and you just have to slot it in, and then you just drill a new hole, and it fixes all those issues. and he has like custom jets, like yeah, like a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And I'm like, man, that would be so cool. Yeah. And even in Japan, like they have these pump nozzles. So I mean, I can show it to you later, but so on one of underneath these caps, there's like a physical nozzle. On every single carburetor for side drafts, it'd be SK or it'd be OER, Weber, or Mikuni. There's just going to be this one hole, and that supplies your entire pump circuit. Like when you suddenly mash a throttle, think of it as like a small injector. It just squirts fuel in. Basically, it's just one solid stream, and that's for every single carb, and it goes past the throttle plate into your intake. Now in Japan, they actually have these custom pump nozzles that are like 5 holes. So as soon as you get airspeed, it just quickly like emulsify everything. It just disperses. So it becomes like a fine mist. And I mean, in theory, it sounds like a really good idea, but then I was actually having a talk with one of my friends who's an engineer, and him and I are like carburetor nutcases. Like we spend hours on like out of our day just to figure stuff out. And he did a calculation, and airspeed going through the carburetor beyond the Venturi is actually going like, I think even beyond Mach 1 speed. Like it goes really fast, right? So when I brought this up, and it even mentions like, okay, well, in theory, this will get rid of a lot of issues. But then once you have sufficient airspeed going, does it really matter whether or not it's like a single stream or like 4 or 5 streams? And then he goes like, you might be onto something. We don't know yet. So I've yet to drop money on those things because it's legitimately $300.
Oh man,
for like a set of 6. And I'm like, I don't want to. Of all the things I can buy with $300,
yeah,
that's like how many Chick-fil-A meals? Like that's a lot. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of these small things that otherwise, like I shouldn't need, like I don't need to spend a lot of time on them, but for the sake of
don't
like
need
knowledge,
to, but you want to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is why instead of studying for finals, I'll just think about these things.
So that's great. Like, so going on off of that, where do you see the future of Sidedraft Specialties?
I mean, right now I've always thought of it as like at least an option for people, for them to use. As you mentioned, like carburetors are a dying art, and there's not a lot of people that do this stuff. So obviously I want to make it available for them, but at the same time I don't want it, because I want something that's consistent, right? So that's sort of why and in terms of like career path as well, it's like that's why I work at Retrosport. That's why I'm doing these things, because I still want to be around, like make use of my major and stuff. But ideally with Sidedraft, I just want it to be available to like anyone and everyone. So if it's someone who's like how I started, just like college student, just got a Z car, I have no idea what carburetors are, I want someone to take a look at them, I want to have my services available for them.
Yeah. Side drafts themselves are an interesting niche.
Yeah.
I forgot where I either saw it or read it, but although carburetors are such an antiquated technology, they're actually still relevant in modern times.
Yeah.
So I forgot how long I read this, but at one point there was this one downdraft carburetor that was like SEMA product of the year, something like that. And we just talked about there are companies manufacturing brand new carburetors in 2020.
I think in terms of like the domestic V8 stuff, I'm pretty sure Holley still develops like carburetors for like their high performance stuff.
I imagine, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only other thing I can really think of, really.
Being a non-muscle car guy, it was wild for me to learned that people are actually taking their fuel injected cars and going back to carburetors.
Yeah, isn't that insane?
Yeah.
But I mean, it kind of feels like, I mean, someone always tells like, so here's my thought process too, because I'm always like a sucker when it comes to results. Like if something is performing really well and it's proven, there's no point in me purposely not going to something like that. So it's already proven that if you go from like, say, carbureted setup into a similarly matched ITB is always going to drive infinitely better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that it's written out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't beat a computer that's controlling injectors that already has a very fine spray pattern and it's right at the back of the valve. There's really nothing that beats that. Now, when someone asks me, it's like, oh, would you go ITBs? I say, yeah. Because I just know it's like, it's proven that it's better. And so when they're like, yeah, but you're like a carb guy. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not blinded by like all these things. Like I know why I understand why people go carburetors, but at the same time I can't refute the results of swapping to an ITB setup.
You still have some practicality.
Yeah. And it's sort of like that mentality too. It's like if something is such like a good option and there's no real like reason for you to go against it, then why are you purposely going against it?
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, there's like plenty of like forum posts. I mean, even then, like I kind of take that as a grain of salt. But I mean, there's like this one particular setup where they have like this crazy road race cam on like a big L series. And, you know, on carburetors, the car was, I don't know, like 1500 RPMs. And then it's like very finicky. It's like not happy unless it's wide open throttle. And then the moment they swapped over to an ITB, that's like match about the same. So I believe the thing was a 55 Weber with a specific Venturi flows about the same as like a 45 millimeter ITB. Or I think that's generally what it is. So when they made that switch, swap over to an electronic fuel injection, swapped over to ITBs, the car idles steady at 900 and they can street drive it. Before it's like, yeah, we have to trailer it everywhere unless it's like at a track. So that by itself is like, okay, well, there's sort of like, there's the whole reasoning why people would go ITBs. And if you want to stick with carbs, by all means. But for me personally, I would just rather go with ITBs.
I don't understand then. So how come still carburetors for your Z?
What's that?
Like, I don't understand. Like, if you would rather go ITBs and fuel injection.
So it's a cost.
Okay.
It's a cost. Because so at face value too, like if you see a set of carburetors, it's like, yeah, you can spend like $1,800 depending on which it is. You have to spend like $1,900 for a set of triples, and then you have to buy the jets for them and whatever it is around them. And then the ITBs by the similar manufacturer, for example, OERs, they offer both ITBs and carburetors. They're priced slightly cheaper, but then you also have to take into account all the sensors that you're going to be using, your computer. You have to pay for your tuner and all of these things. So yeah, you may spend like $1,800 on ITBs, but then you realize you're like $4,000 into the hole.
Yeah.
Right? Because it just adds up quickly the more you get into dyno time. I mean, obviously, if you spend the same amount of time on the dyno with carburetors, it's different. It's probably going to be up there as well. But for me, since I already know what to look out for in terms of like what jets to use, at this moment, it doesn't make sense for me to make that switch because there's other things I want to buy as opposed to swapping from carburetors to ITBs.
Okay.
But also, I'm nowhere near to make full use of ITBs because that's only when I'm trying to chase like every single bit of horsepower.
Yeah.
And that's already after spending like, say, a ton of money on the cylinder head, a ton of money on the block, you know, like ITB should be the very last thing that anyone should really spring out for.
Yeah, so we talked about that earlier before the podcast too. Like ITBs are probably dollar per horsepower, the worst decision, right?
Yeah, pretty much. You might as well just like burn your dollars, but they sound cool. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, I'm on the same boat. If I got like an NA car that's like modern NA, the first thing I would probably do is like slap ITBs on it because they sound so sick. Doesn't make sense, but yeah.
Does any of your knowledge from Sidedraft transfer over to modern ITBs?
A little bit, in a sense that I know generally what to do, and like it's just translating everything to a computer. I mean, I probably, if I spend enough time behind a computer, what values does what, I don't think I'd have too terrible of a time because I already know what I'm chasing out for. But that's only because I know it at like, say, a very fundamental understanding.
Okay. I'll tell you kind of premise why I asked that question. 20 valve ITBs are getting really rare now. They're complicated. They have Toyota specific parts that are all getting discontinued.
Yeah.
So I think the trend right now is to go motorcycle ITBs.
Oh yeah.
So that's why I'm asking. Like,
I mean, even then, people are running just like Caheens.
yeah, and like the cost too. Like
right.
Gixxer ITBs are like like throwaway cheap, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends too on like what computer you're going to be running and what applications are compatible with them, right? I think now it's like everybody is like running a Haltech. And so that's sort of like the new meta of like all things ECU wise. Because if you asked me like, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I'd be like, oh yeah, Mega Squirt.
Oh yeah.
Right. But now it's even, you can buy like a very entry level like Haltech for like a very reasonable price.
Yeah, I think the newcomer and the most popular to the market right now is Link.
Right,
like,
Link ECU, right?
Yeah, Link plug and play to everything now.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, if someone's like a pro at a like using the Haltech interface and they've done quite a bit of tuning, I don't see why that would be like an issue. But if someone like me who've only done carburetors going to like an interface for a Haltech, I've never even seen one. I'd be like, what? like what's going on? But I mean, I don't think I'd be completely lost, but I probably spent as much time as I did on carburetors just to figure that stuff out. And obviously it's just starting from scratch to an extent, right? Because you need to have some sort of like baseline of where to go. And obviously with carburetors, I've already established that baseline. So it's very easy for me to figure out where to go. But with something where I have like zero experience in, I don't think that's going to be like very feasible. Although I would love to learn just for my own personal gain, but in order to add that to my repertoire of like skill sets, dude, that's a big ask. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's see. We're at 1:30, so yeah. So we'll wrap up the podcast.
Sure.
Let's see. First of all, I want to really thank you again.
Oh yeah, of course.
For coming down and like being to meet you.
Yeah,
and
thanks for having me.
like have your consulting time was great.
Yeah.
I'm like pumped for these I'm accelerator pumped for these carburetors.
Oh no, it's begun. The dad jokes of carburetors are coming out, man.
But yeah, man, one last question. So your personal Instagram, how'd you come up with that name? Does it mean anything?
It's my last name.
Oh
yeah.
Okay, great. Now I feel like an idiot. But okay, that totally makes sense now.
Yeah, no, don't worry. You're not the only one that's thought.
I was trying to like think of like some carburetor pun or reference, but
no, people thought like I'm trolling like in real life. Like even in school, people thought I was like, wait, is that really your last name? I'm like, yeah, you're not kidding. Like, yeah. Cool. Don't worry. I had to like convince someone that it actually is my last name, so I had to show them my ID.
Oh my god!
And it was only up to that point where they thought I was kidding until that point. Then it's like, oh, you're actually serious. I'm like,
yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, man. Like that's what I've been trying to tell you. Like,
but yeah, so if you'd like to shout out some of your social channels, where can we find you?
Oh yeah, you can find me on my personal page on Instagram. It's Cobangbang with a 0. So it's C0BNG. And then you can also follow my Sidedraft Specialties, where I post a lot of like all things carburetors and all things cars that I've messed on, and that's Sidedraft_specialties.
Awesome. But yeah, man, I mean, thank you so much again.
Yeah.
I'm going to get these parts ordered up, and then, yeah, we'll be in contact again, and we'll go mess with my car, and we'll have another conversation.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be so much fun. It's gonna sound so sick.
No, I look forward to it, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.